Welcome back, everybody. I am so incredibly pumped to have you here for another explainer. Today, we're not just doing your standard, dry historical recount. No, we are exploring something way more profound. We're looking at this incredible, sudden emotional shift from the absolute deepest, darkest grief imaginable to overwhelming, pure joy. We're going to unpack the context behind a very specific, incredibly famous chapter of the Quran, Surah Al-Kawthar, and we're going to look at the deeply human story of the Prophet Muhammad that sits right beneath its surface. So as we go through this, really pay close attention to the structural shifts in emotion.
Okay, let's dive into this, because this whole thing starts with a totally fascinating historical anomaly. Normally, right, when the Prophet received a revelation, he would just simply recite it. But on this one very rare occasion, it's recorded that he was just sitting there in pure silence. The atmosphere was incredibly heavy with sadness. Then, out of nowhere, he just raises his head and smiles, like a genuine, bright, real smile. He actually paused to announce to his companions that a special revelation had just come to him before he even spoke a single word of it. So this chapter is intrinsically linked to his personal joy. But, to understand why that smile is so miraculous, we have to look at the immense, suffocating darkness that came right before it.
To truly grasp the gravity of his situation, we need to talk about this specific Arabic term, ayala. Basically, it means to desperately need someone, to lean toward them for support, much like a little child relies entirely on their mother. Now, the Prophet was a messenger, obviously, but he was also a human being, right? He had this profound, universal human need for emotional support and family connection. And the harsh reality of his life was that he was constantly, repeatedly left in a state of ayala, a state of desperate, desperate need. Just look at this devastating timeline. It shows a pattern of relentless, heartbreaking loss. He lost his father before he was even born. He lost his mother in early childhood. He leaned on his grandfather, who treated him like his own son, but then lost him too. Then his uncle, Abu Talib, the guy who fiercely protected him when the antagonism against him was at its absolute peak, gone. And then his ultimate emotional anchor, his wife Khadijah, was taken from him. Literally every single time he built a vital emotional support system, it was ripped away. He was constantly left in need.
And you have to understand, this stress wasn't just personal, it was wildly communal. Notice this number here, the 1,800 companions who journeyed with him for Hajj. To avoid being attacked, they had to take this treacherous, literally non-human path over sharp black rocks. Their shoes melted off. Their feet were scraped, bleeding, completely torn up. And after all that agonizing effort, they were turned back at the border, no way in. The shock and the grief of his people weighed so heavily on him. The Prophet desperately needed emotional relief. He needed the comfort of family, which brings us to the most agonizing chapter of his entire life.
Section 1. The Cruel Neighbor Next Door, or When Grief Meets Mockery.
The Prophet had just entered the absolute darkest emotional valley you can imagine, the loss of his infant son. You see, the relationship between parents and children, it's deeply reciprocal. Yes, kids need their parents, but parents desperately need their children too. Holding your child makes all your worldly stress just melt away. And for someone who grew up utterly deprived of a mother and a father, the Prophet poured his entire heart into his son. He wanted to give him all the love he himself never received as a boy. So when that infant son passed away, this suffocating sadness just engulfed his entire home. Now, to truly understand the gravity of this scene, we really have to look at the architecture of the time. The homes back then were not like our modern, insulated apartments. First off, the walls were incredibly thin, paper thin. Second, the living room was essentially an open courtyard in the front yard, sitting right under the sun, with absolutely no roof. This meant there was zero, and I mean absolute zero, acoustic privacy. Whatever happened in your house was immediately broadcast to the house right next door. You could hear literally everything.
And guess who lived directly next door? Abu Lahab, one of the absolute worst, most aggressive enemies of Islam, who also tragically happened to be the Prophet's own uncle. So as the Prophet sits in his open home, openly weeping and holding his deceased baby, Abu Lahab hears the cries. But instead of showing even a tiny shred of basic human decency, you could hear him laughing. He was overjoyed. He literally ran out of his house, screaming into the streets in celebration, shouting, "Muhammad's name will not be carried on." Because, in that culture, lineage was passed exclusively through sons. Abu Wahab used this zero-privacy architecture to completely weaponize the Prophet's deepest grief, mocking him loudly for the entire neighborhood to hear. It's just brutally cruel.
And this brilliantly illustrates our next pivot. Section 2, the gift of Al-Kawthar.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم جاءك الكوثر فصل لربك وانحر إن شانئك هو الأبتر.
A divine intervention. Right at this exact moment of overwhelming, suffocating grief and just ruthless mockery, Islamic tradition states that the words of Surah Al-Kawthar descended. This is the divine intervention that is said to have provoked that sudden, beautiful smile we talked about at the very beginning of this explainer. The text here acts not just as a book of rules or laws, but as an actual guide for human emotion. Let's break down the linguistics of the word Al-Kawthar. It comes from a very strange, very rare Arabic pattern called fawal. It doesn't just mean a lot. No, it is this unusual extreme hyperbole, denoting an incredible, overwhelming, unimaginable abundance of good. It also famously refers to a very specific, magnificent river in paradise.
So what exactly was this overwhelming good that made him smile right through his tears? Well, tradition states it was a whole package of incredible gifts. Yes, it's the river and Jannah. It's an elevated name, meaning every single time his followers say his name, they bless him, which completely destroys Abu Lahab's claim that his name wouldn't be carried on. It's a unique station on Judgment Day. And crucially, it is the Ummah, the enduring, massive nation of believers. The Prophet was overjoyed because these gifts weren't just for him alone. He gets to actually share that river with his followers. He gets to use his unique station on Judgment Day to benefit the believers. For him, the sheer love for his people completely eclipsed his own pain.
Moving into Section 3, From Patience to Gratitude, the Ultimate Paradigm Shift.
When you read the surah, you notice something absolutely staggering. There is zero mention of the baby passing away. There is no, "I am so sorry for your loss." The text completely ignores the cruelty of Abu Lahab, and it completely ignores what was just taken away. So the crucial point is this. When tragedy strikes, the standard human response is to say, "Hey, be patient." Focusing on what is taken demands patience, right? Or sabr. But the text outlines a total paradigm shift. By only mentioning the overwhelming abundance of what has been given, it actively forces a shift to shukr, or ultimate gratitude. It is a complete rewiring of how to process human grief.
And the amazing thing is, the surah doesn't just leave him with a warm feeling. It actually gives him a concrete action plan. How do you physically manifest this ultimate gratitude? Step 1, pray to your master. Not as some tedious, annoying obligation you quickly squeeze in during a lunch break so you don't get in trouble, but as a joyful coping mechanism. You stand before the master who took care of you. And step 2 is nahr, making a significant devotional sacrifice. Specifically, we're talking about a large animal slaughtered from the front of the neck. It is a grand physical gesture for a completely grand gift. This builds an incredible historical connection too. By commanding prayer and sacrifice right here, the source text is directly connecting the legacy of Muhammad to the ancient legacy of Ibrahim. Think about it. Ibrahim was commanded to sacrifice his own living son. Muhammad just lost his son, but he is being asked for a much, much easier sacrifice, just an animal. It's like this gentle reminder that he belongs to a massive, prophetic legacy where the absolutely hardest things have actually been made easy for him. But what about that cruel neighbor laughing next door? Well, the surah handles him with absolute mastery. It dismisses him in a single, final sentence. The enemy will be cut off. Boom, that's it. The Prophet didn't even have to ask for the hater to be taken care of. The divine has already handled it. The lesson here is incredibly powerful for all of us. Do not use up precious real estate in your mind and your heart for people who hate you. Just let it go. Do right by the divine, and the divine is absolutely going to handle your enemies.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how directly this 1400-year-old history applies to you and me right now today. We all have stress. We all face deep grief. We all deal with highly antagonistic people. Your takeaways from this explainer are crystal clear. You need to recognize your own Al-Kawthar, the wildly abundant gifts you've already been given. You have to actively, intentionally shift your mental focus from what you've lost to what you firmly possess. Evict those haters from your mental real estate and use profound, deep gratitude and joyful prayer as the actual tools to literally erase your sadness.
Which leaves us with this final thought. Look, we are all going to face emotional valleys. That's just life. The real question is, when you're standing in your own darkest moment, hearing the proverbial thin walls of your life broadcasting your pain, how are you going to shift your focus? Will you just stare at the pain of what was taken from you? Or will you look up at the overwhelming gifts you've been given and find your smile right there in the silence, just like the Prophet did? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I really hope this breakdown illuminated the depth of this history for you. Keep focusing on those gifts, and I will see you next time.